Yeah, so a lot of the work that I've done over my career has been in learning and development and doing a lot of executive leadership training. And my colleague and I, who happen to be the head of HR at a company I worked at before, we were facilitating this training with a group of senior leaders in Europe. Quite a few of them were based in the UK. And we do this activity as a metaphor of goal setting. That is where you throw rings, or we call it the ring toss activity. And so, as part of the debrief, as we were walking through this, my colleague was leading this function, and she was talking about how it doesn't matter where you toss from around the room. You can toss from here, you can toss from there, you can toss anywhere. And then the room at this point is starting to look somewhere between shocked and laughing. So then she didn't know what to do. We looked at each other and she kept going and saying, "You can toss all over the room. It doesn't matter." And now at this point, half the room is now on the floor. Half the room is shocked. I don't know what's happening. She doesn't know what's happening. So I enter the equation. I'm like, I don't understand what's so funny. I toss from all over the room. Now, one guy who was one of the head of sales said, "Hey, come over here really quickly." And he literally pulled me aside. He said, "Do you have any idea what the word tossing means in the UK?" And I said, "I have no idea." Now, needless to say, I don't want to share it with you here in this podcast, but if you look it up, you'll realize that I was not tossing all over the room. We were throwing rings from all over the room. And anyway, that was called that was a funny and embarrassing story. And one of the lessons I learned from that is if you can't laugh at yourself, then who can you laugh at? So that was about 10 years ago, funny enough. And my former boss and I still talk about that story, and it still brings a good smile to our face.
That's amazing. So, hello and welcome. I'm Karen Rosenfeld here with Omar Glass, Growth Space's CEO and co-founder. Today's guest is Jeff Miller. Jeff has over 30 years of experience in learning and development. He has a PhD in educational psychology and has served as the Chief Learning Officer and Vice President of Learning and Organizational Effectiveness at Cornerstone On Demand, and he's now a partner at DoorTwo. Hello and welcome, Jeff. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Karen. And hi, Homer.
I'm Googling toss. I'm trying to figure out what it is. I'm asking ChatGPT what's the meaning of toss in English, UK English.
It's very rude. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's very rude. I don't know if your clients would want me to elaborate on exactly what that is.
Let's jump into your successes. We're always looking, our listeners are always
Okay,
looking.
I understand what is toss. Yeah, you cannot say what it is.
Thank you, Homer.
Now that the level has been set.
Now that our friendship has just gone to new levels, it's fantastic.
I really hope we do not have any British listeners to this podcast. So thank you, Jeff. But yeah, it's a great story. Now it's a great story. Before I didn't understand, but kudos.
Yeah, Homer, and neither did we.
So our listeners are always working to create programs that make an impact in their orgs. So talk to me about what has been the most successful talent development program of your career, and let's talk about why it was successful and what factors contributed to your achievement.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would have to say that the most successful talent management program built was when I was at Cornerstone. So when I was hired there in 2013, I was the first internal resource focused on L&D at Cornerstone, which was the world's largest learning company. So I was, of course, a little surprised. I asked the CEO and founder when I was interviewing. My last question was, what took you so long to put an L&D resource in? And obviously, well, they have an LMS, so they have programs. But what he shared with me was that the employees wanted even more focus on that. And so I was a lone soldier there for a while, and we had to build a learning program from scratch. And so the easiest way to explain it was there was certainly a bit of a learning culture, but the company had been growing so fast for 6 straight years that growth had exploded, teams had exploded. They just really needed more focus. So there were really, the way I would describe it is it was like I built a 4-tier program that really was wildly well received. And we focused on leadership, we focused on management, we focused on programs for individual contributors. And then we introduced a different program that was really designed to create a culture of learning across the entire business globally. So, from a leadership training perspective, and I promise this is not self-serving, we ended up partnering with the company that I eventually joined, DoorTwo, and I had known their founder for at that point about 22 years or so. I had gone to their trainings, and I had been looking to bring these in, and so we brought them into Cornerstone. So we brought three core programs in that were really focused on how to motivate teams, how to communicate and manage psychological distress, and how to understand and manage change. So those three tier programs for leadership training were wildly popular. We would open up registration on the LMS, and they would literally be full within 10 minutes. People were offering. I mean, it got to the point where a couple of times in our LA office, uh, also a funny story. Somebody really wanted to get into the program, so I was offered tickets to a Laker game to jump the line, which I did not take, mainly because the Lakers were not doing particularly well at that time. But different story. But we ended up really rolling that out. We ended up doing that training anywhere from Hong Kong to Israel to New Zealand, Australia, all over Europe, all over the States, and it was really well received. We also then built a management training program. And since I was alone and we had a lot of courses that people really wanted one on one contact in addition to e learning courses, one of the reasons why I love what you all do. And so what we ended up doing was my dream was to build a manager training program from the ground up. But things picked up speed so fast when I joined there. I ended up getting certified in situational leadership and crucial conversations. So within the span of about 5 months, we had a soup to nuts management leadership program that was really designed for every leader in the company. And it enabled people to grow to understand this is how you approach your employees individually. This is how you grow and motivate teams. So the programs really took up wonderful steam where I was able then to hire a couple of people. We all got certified in all of these programs. So we built that out. And then the last program, individual contributors, by the way, we had a tuition reimbursement program that was fantastic. So people went on, and the engineers, for example, were able to go on to Udemy, take any courses they wanted. They could go get certifications, project management. So we really tried to enable people. My goal was let's enable people to run their own lives and run their own businesses. So the last piece, the culture building piece, was probably the coolest program that we built, and people still talk about it. So the quick story on it was that the CEO and founder, Adam Miller, on like my second or third day at Cornerstone, uh, called me into his office and he said, I have this idea where employees can clear their transcript, just take all of their e-learning courses. And I said, what if we throw a different idea out there? What if we just send a survey out to around 800 employees that were at the company at the time? And let's see, what are they good at? What do they want to learn? And if they were good at something and were taught how to deliver and facilitate instruction, would they be willing to teach their colleagues? So we ended up throwing a survey out and we got about, I want to say 500 responses, anywhere from how to code from Python to managing difficult conversations. Somebody actually put, I can do wine tasting, found out that they were a third level sommelier. So it was like a legitimate program. To make a very long story short, the program was incredibly successful. It was global. We ended up capturing in the LMS around 60,000 hours over 5 years of employee ideated, designed, and delivered training. And so we really found wildly that you can build a culture of learning, but we really handed the keys to the learning kingdom over to the group. People got better at facilitating, presenting. We did like moth things. So what was really incredible and really fun, which is why I would call it the most successful talent development program of my career, was that in a fairly short period of time, the entire culture of the organization was reinforced. It wasn't changed or pivoted, but it was strengthened, and people all over the world were able to connect a little bit better, and they experienced work a little different. So, long story, but that would probably be the best one I can recall.
Can I ask what challenges you were up against? Like, I can imagine, how do you market internally? How do you get people excited about this? Like, you know, it's great someone's a sommelier, but like, how do you get them to build things out and want to contribute in that way?
It's a great question. That was my fear, right? I'm an only child, so I had that terrible fear of if I have a party and nobody comes, what's going to happen? But what ended up happening was literally we threw the survey out, Alan, but we had 500 plus responses. So then the first problem became, what's the right number of courses? Where do we have them? How do we make sure that people that are remote are connected? So we actually started playing. It's the first time I actually really thought about this. We started really playing in the, what do you do with people in office, at home, fully hybrid, remote? How do you do this? And so I think that the challenge really was that we would have capacity problems. It was a good problem. In other words, we had so many people that wanted to facilitate that it became, well, you're not going to do this one, but you're going to do that one. And then the other space, the mistake I made in the first one was that there was such overwhelming demand that we ended up having, I want to say like 50 courses on the first one of these development day things. Uh, and these people put, time into developing how to do a presentation. This probably would have been a perfect space for them to partner with like a growth space presentation coach, to be fully candid, because I ended up having to do a lot of the coaching. I just ran out of time. So some people probably felt less prepared. Some people's sessions, we tried to market and I think we did a good job. But then there were a few of those sessions where some people who had really prepared well, their sessions just weren't perfectly attended. We had other sessions that were massively overflow sessions. So it became a process of hits and misses where some people had sessions where they felt like they had a good opportunity to develop presentation skills. But, people were pulled. And, when you have sessions and I think we had sometimes 10 sessions potentially a day where people wanted to go to all of the sessions, but they just had, work to do. And so I think that there was a lot of areas, but I think the challenge became doing it globally. And so when you have programs going on in New Zealand, Israel, and the US, and you're the only one running it, well, there's a day where you're not sleeping. So I think the failures of it were failing forward for sure, because there were multiple people that delivered sessions time and time and time again. In fact, my favorite part of the story coming out of the failure was I was actually speaking about this development day program at a conference, and the person who was the head of HR at Sears at the time, I think it was Sears, he ended up taking the program and they called it Learnapalooza at Sears, and he said it was wildly successful. So what we found was it was all of the pieces that we did, from the leadership programs to this development day thing, everything was replicable. But the challenge that I found, to go back, for example, to the leadership development programs, the lesson that I learned then that we fixed was, we have a belief, especially at DoorTwo, we have a belief that one-shot training, research on this is overwhelming, like one-shot training just doesn't work. So the challenge that we had was, I was doing all of these trainings with my colleague and boss at the time, the head of HR. A lot of the areas that we were trying to work on was people wanted coaching, people wanted follow-up, they wanted team meetings. So it ended up being where, as my role was growing within the business, I finally got to build a team out, a small team. It became how are we going to get all of this done? So there were certainly times where functions didn't get the attention that they really wanted or needed. It's why I tell clients all the time, don't just count on external people to deliver training, and don't just count on internal people to deliver training. Galvanize your resources, put them where you need strength, and then leverage a strength towards the core opportunity that you're trying to solve. So, I mean, I could talk about things that I failed at in the L&D space over and over and over again. But the key is, if you're able to take that, people talk about Carol Dweck's work on mindset. If you're able to bring a learning mindset in and recognize that fixed mindsets come in and hit you in the head all the time, then you're able to start moving the needle a little bit forward. And my sense is, the more learning mindset that companies bring in through their programs, through their coaching, through the executive team, how they communicate, then you're able to start moving the needle, and people feel comfortable being more vulnerable. And you're able to build, historically there was the learning culture. What's the learning culture? And I found out, I think several years ago, that that's the wrong target. And I think that the target companies need to be looking at is building a feedback culture, because the feedback is where people learn. It's where they get new insight. The learning is great, but I take a lot of my learning theory and core principles of it. There's one Russian psychologist by the name of Lev Vygotsky who argued 60 years ago that true learning, again, it's where coaching is beautiful. True learning occurs when you embrace a concept called co-construction. Let's take a concept that we're both talking about and learning about, but then let's deepen the conversation, personalize it, and make it our own, co-construct the knowledge together. And we get that by giving each other feedback. So last thing I'll say about feedback is one thing that we learned, and we really have dropped into organizations everywhere, is most feedback programs talk about giving feedback and how to take feedback, when I think they're missing the most important part, which is how do you ask for feedback in a healthy way where you're not looking like, hey, can you just tell me I'm okay, which is not feedback. And so I think there's a lot we can explore.
I love it. So first of all, about feedback, because I think you mentioned very fast a lot of very interesting things, and you have a lot of insights there. But I think the challenge I'm seeing with that feedback is not only giving, receiving, asking for feedback, is also what do you do once you get the feedback, right? Like how do you move from feedback to impact, which is the hard thing. And usually you want, because it's easy as a manager to give feedback. Let's say, hey, you need to listen more. You need to improve your communications. You need to work on your empathy, but how, right? So I think that's a big question that a lot of organizations are facing, and something that we at GrowthSpace really deal with. But what I liked about what you did at Cornerstone are two main things. It's about you basically blended the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach. So like you focused on like culture, it came from the CEO. So it wasn't something that HR do. It was something that's connected to the core of the organization. And also when you talked about the first program you built, you mentioned like three themes, like change management and two others. So you were intentional in what you're trying to get out of it, right? So it was focused, not just, hey, I want to develop my managers, and it's not generic. It's specific to the, again, changes of the business and stuff like that. And the second thing is about the personalization. Like I never heard about such survey and trying to like find the right course for each individual need out of like 500 responses. So you both focused on the personalization in like the specific skill they're trying to develop, but also in the format. Like you mentioned that you really had in mind whether they are hybrid or in the office or remote. So yeah, you had a lot of really smart ingredients there that I think it's
Yeah,
really
I
inspiring.
appreciate it, Amr. And what it's when I get excited, I tend to pick up my velocity and cadence. But you picked up on a couple of really key points that I didn't even touch on, which was first, if you want any program to work, I believe this, you've got to have CEO endorsement. That's one. Two, what you also picked up on, which was the sort of the core tenet of the entire thing, was which I didn't actually share. The only rule I had on the first one of those program days was nobody from HR could facilitate any session, because the intent was I did not want this to be HR driven. I wanted it CEO sponsored, employee driven. And so I think that was a really, really cool space. And then the work that we do with coaching, I think the space that you're getting into with the feedback is absolutely right, which is so much of coaching, so much of feedback is what are you learning? What are you committing to work on next? And then how do we call it at DoorTwo, we just call it track and loop. Like, let's go back. What did we talk about last time? And what are you doing? And so many people managers, I find, somehow forget that a core part of their job is to not only deliver results, but also to develop their people. So that means that they need to be coaching. And so, for example, one of the things that I know you and I have spoken about before is that where DoorTwo is really focused is in the upper echelons of the organization, and where there is an understanding of let's figure out where expertise lies, and frontline managers up to directors and senior directors. I mean, I've believed this really ever since I was at Cornerstone, which is that director level is where businesses slow down. It's where communication dies. It's where all of a sudden you lose velocity downstream in the organization. So a lot of the work that we do with our executive team is ensuring that clarity is present, communication is present, and that we don't make the assumption that just because we told the company the goal one time, they heard it. And so I think that what I love about what you're saying, and I love about where our, both of our organizations really help companies, is managers need to be coaching their employees. But when you need specific skill development and the manager is truly in tune with what people need, that also means, I believe, that if the manager is in tune with the employee needs, the employee is going to be more in tune with what they need. Once you have, we call it clarity, alignment, and then commitment, is now it's a, hey, I want you to get coaching on this skill. Whereas we do work at the senior most levels of organizations to make sure that their vision is able then to be realized downstream. So that's where I think there's some really unique spaces. And I think people need to understand, I think you mentioned Karen at the beginning, my doctorate is in educational psychology, but the focus of it is in human motivation and learning. So there's so many different themes and so many different theories and so many different perspectives, but the gist of it is that everybody's different. And so they're going to need to connect with somebody, whether it's a manager, an external coach, that's going to seek to understand them, because people, I believe, seek desperately to be understood. And I think that right now in the workforce, so many people are in that, well, are we remote? Are we hybrid? Are we bringing people back? That's where people need to be seen and heard today. And I think that's where the work that both of our companies do really is important. And it also then empowers managers to take more ownership of the work that they're doing. So to go back to what you said, Amr, it's let's find what are the skills that people need to go forward, create vulnerability between manager and employee, and then work on doing that work. And so I think that's where businesses are going to succeed. And I also think that's going to be where we start to see the slowdown, despite economic and people. It's like a hot hiring market. I think that's going to obviously increase retention, but I think the work that we all do is also going to have a direct impact on retention. But as everybody knows, like the mythical beast in L&D is what's the return on investment? How do you prove, because it's often seen as the cost center, but so I played with this idea years ago. What if we didn't call it ROI, but we called it like ROLOI, the return on lack of investment in learning. And so I think there's a lot of conversations that companies need to have about, are the people focused in the right direction to do the right things?
Well, damn. I mean, that was incredible. Let's pivot to you a little bit. Now, you've been talking a lot about the space, but um, I'm curious, looking back now, what advice would you give to yourself, to a young Jeff Miller just starting out at Cornerstone? What advice would you give to yourself to set yourself up for success? What advice would you give to other CLOs to set themselves up for success in the long term?
I hit on one of them a little bit ago, um, which is, don't try to do everything yourself. Um, if you're able to park your, I don't think I came in with like this raging ego when I started to work at Cornerstone. I actually was a director of L&D at two other companies. And when I went to Cornerstone, I actually took a drop and the salary was the same, but I went and took an L&D manager role. And when I was in conversations with my hiring manager, she said, "Are you going to have an issue with this?" And I said, "No, if I can do a good enough job, I know you're going to be motivated to promote me quickly." And I said, if we have that agreement, like my goal here is less about title. I mean, I don't walk around. The example I give you is, I guess, you see my name in the bottom corner. Like I don't put doctor this everywhere I go. It's always been, let's just do good work. And if we do, I've always believed if you do good work, then the results are going to pay off. So I think the advice that I would have really given myself, I got from several people that were really important, which was one is be curious. Uh, That's one, which is always have an open mind when you step into things. Like, a colleague of mine defines listening as the absence of thought. And so the advice I would have given myself is have a perspective, but like many people, sometimes we think about what we're going to say next rather than really just listen to what's coming at us. And so I think one would be infinitely curious. Two, the advice I really would have given myself is what I learned once I came over to DoorTwo, which is outlearn everybody. It kind of ties to curiosity, but read everything you can, podcasts, books, audiobooks. Just keep reading. And I mean, I will often have like 5 or 6 books going at any one time. I'm actually the book I just got. I'm actually now just blanking on it. I think it's called The New Happy, I think is what it is, and it's a conversation that differentiating between what people defined happiness as before and how people are defining happiness going forward. And the crux I've gotten out of the book, I've sort of just in the first 50 or 60 pages, but it's a wonderful read, is talking about happiness is often about making others feel good, others inspiring others, helping others be productive. So I've actually just, even though I'm 50 or 60 pages in, I share books with people. The other advice I think I would give myself, especially as an L&D person, early in my career is, and this is going to sound maybe a little weird. So for the L&D folks that are listening, one, L&D is often not centered to the organization. And so what I realized, and I did not realize this early in my career, is you have to, I really trained myself through getting coached, to be honest, to have the recognition that I had to prove my value every single day, at every single meeting. And I had to almost like break into have a voice at this table. So it's kind of like when people say, well, I have a seat at the table, I don't have a voice at the table. My response to them is kindly and gently, by the way, is that's a you problem. Like if you have like a crack in the door, go through it with you know candor and with a degree of gentleness. We don't want to be bulls in china shops. I think that advice I think really would have been trust other people, trust yourself, outwork and outlearn people. In fact, my daughter is now an actor in New York City and working on building her career. And I just told her right when she was starting this, I said, just remember, be humble, outlearn people, take feedback and act on it. To Almer's comment earlier, but be infinitely curious. And those are the kind of things that I think will ultimately pay off. And again, I know that feeds directly into the work that you all do, but it also, again, not to pander to the crowd, it's why I love the fact that there is, hey, this is a skill I want to work on. So I'm going to set X number of sessions with somebody and they're going to focus just on that. Like the executive coaching I do with people can go there, but then go here and it comes back here. But when people come to me, in fact, there are several of my clients that will come to me and say, I've got people lower down in the organization. This is what they're doing. Can you work with them? And I said, look, leverage a strength towards an opportunity, build your resources, build a community. So that way, when you're having a problem, you're able to refer the right source. And while I love that people want to work with me on this, if it's not your sweet spot, don't take the business. And I think that's a space for L&D people that they're starting their career, which is don't just say yes to everything. Sometimes that's not my sweet spot. But it's like I was telling somebody asked me recently, they said, how do I refer you in? And it's probably very similar to you, which is when you have a problem, I refer to it as the I got a guy thing. So it's like, I got a guy you got to talk to. Very similar, which is if it's this company or this company, where do you go to for culture? Where do you go to for difficult conversations? And there's a lot of resources. And I was talking to somebody else in the coaching space that said, hey, you're doing some partner work with this company growth space. You refer people to other coaching companies. Why? I said, well, if it's not in our sweet spot, sadly there's enough people out there that need to grow that there's enough room in this pool for everybody. So that would be my advice, which is don't try to solve all the world's problems. Be curious, be the biggest learner you can in an organization. And when your CEO does that, that is like people see it and then they want to emulate it.
No, I love that. Especially, I think, by the way, it's not just an L&D. I think across the board, if you see your role as something where you're proving yourself constantly and you're bringing yourself to the table and your skill set and you're constantly building on that, I think that's the way that you show value and you help others do better themselves. And it just sort of percolates up in that way.
Absolutely. I mean, to your point, like I was doing a sales QBR, and we were one of the things that I started to realize at QBRs was that so often in any function they would say, "Here was the project, here's where we messed up, and here's the goal for the next quarter." And I was like, "Okay, wait a minute. You're forgetting to catalog the wins. Like, what do you want to make sure you keep doing, and what do you want to make sure you stop doing?" And so I absolutely think that, yeah, it's in sales, it's engineering, it's finance, it's everywhere. And I think that's the transformation for a lot of the senior executives, which is even if you're a CFO of a publicly traded company, you're still projection here. It's still your responsibility to develop your people. I used to have when I finally started to get to hire people at my last company. I used to ask the question, like, what are your career goals? And there was only one right answer. I don't play the gotcha game. But if people that interviewed didn't say, I want you to develop me to take your job, I was like, they were out, because I wanted people that wanted to be developed, that wanted to, because what that did for me is they were coming after my job. That elevated my game. And that it was scary, by the way. You're vulnerable because you're coaching people to come after you, but then you've also then got to find resources so you can get coached, so you're always growing. And then it becomes this perpetuating cycle where if the business is doing their work, there's going to be space to grow. And it goes back, not to go to a super like knot hole here. Um, but one of the things that we realized when companies were doing the 9 box exercise of performance and potential is that if you were looking at where companies are incentivizing and paying people, for some weird reason at most companies, the only way that you can grow in your career and have prestige and have income and make bonuses and make like larger bonuses and stock options is if you manage people. And I mean, I've worked with numerous individual contributors that moved into management that hated management, and I said, well, then why are you doing it? And they said, it's the only way to forward your career. So for heads of HR that are listening, look at where you're putting your dollars. Because if you've got people that are happy in their roles, pay them well for it and let them sit there. And I think that that's a fine space to be, because people management, I mean, as you both know, when I first started talking to the young like the young individual contributors that wanted to get into management at Cornerstone, I would say to them, because they were these young and hungry people with like sparkles in their eyes, I said, so tell me, why do you want to go into management? And they would all say, well, they want to help people. I want to do this. After a couple of years, the question shifted. Pardon my French. It was just what I said was, then they would come and they say, hey, can we get a half an hour? I want to talk about my career. And I said, absolutely. Let's go sit down and have a cup of coffee. And they would say, I want to be a manager. And then the question changed to, why the hell would you want to manage people? Like, do you understand that you're managing these 5 or 6 people and their problems and their differences? And you, by the way, as a manager, you have to pivot to those 5 or 10 styles. If you're expecting them to pivot to you, you're fighting a losing game. So they loved the conversation. But what ended up happening is the people that realized, oh, I didn't understand what management really was. It's much like my first director job that I took. I was hired as a director at a food and beverage company. It was my first corporate job. I was a professor for 25 years. So I went in as a director. I got hired. I still have no idea how I got the job, but I was hired as a director. I swear to God, I had no idea it was a senior position in the organization. So it was a coffee company called the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. And I walked into to one of the stores, and I just went in. I said, "Hey, like, I'm a fairly mellow guy. I grew up on a surfboard in Los Angeles." I was like, "Hey, like, how you doing?" They were like, "Are you the new director of training?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I am." And the whole place just like snapped to attention. And it's like, "Oh wait, I got to go talk to my boss. Like, I think I don't understand something." I was managing 5 people. I had no idea what to do. And while we had a great time, we built some great programs. What would have been great at that moment early in my career would have been more coaching, more guiding, more mentoring. So it's a beautiful space to be in. And if people really want to invest in developing people, and it's not your strength, learn it. Or B, if you know there are areas that you struggle with, then that's where you get outside help. And that's that balance where people need to understand that, you know, budget, we often will talk to people about hiring us or hiring other companies. And what they don't realize, I'm sure you experience similar things, is bigger companies hiring for large scale investments in, for example, coaching and consulting, unless you're working with like one of the big four, which are going to bring in 15 consultants and do great work, is like a rounding error on most of these budgets. And what you get for that is massive value and growth. And so I think there's so much for businesses to be thinking about as they're growing their company. And I think right now, coaching consulting is just going to be a competitive advantage for companies.
Amazing. Well, I think we're at time. I want to make sure you get to your day. So I want to thank you, first of all. I love every conversation I've had with you. So this is really, really fun for us. And it was great to get to know you a little bit better and definitely hear your saucer story. So thank you.
Yeah, it's going to live in infamy now. And before I go, thank you for the time. I love what I also love, and I think the final takeaway for for listeners to think about is, in many spaces, people could consider DoorTwo, our firm, and GrowSpace as potential competitors. And when you actually get to know people and talk to people differently, you're able to see that as a group, again, go back to the development day concept. If you build a community of learning, and if you build this community, then leverage the community to solve problems. And I think that builds, by the way, I think client loyalty is when they realize, don't use me for this, use this. That is a powerful message for people to hear. So keep doing the good work that you're doing, and look forward to talking to you all soon. Thanks for the time.